Hello and welcome to The Big Fight. So 1 year of the Modi government. What do we make of it? Have achche din really come? I guess part of the problem that Mr. Modi has faced is extremely high expectations. So it's always tough to live up to high expectations. On the other hand, there was a certain sense that he is somebody who can really get a lot of things done in a hurry. Has he been able to do that or not? So over the course of the next 1 hour, we're going to try and get some sort of a report card done on various fronts of how Narendra Modi has actually fared as Prime Minister and how this government has been doing overall. And a great panel to help us take us through all of this. Nalan Kohli joining us from the BJP. Manish Tiwari of the Congress Party. Manish, the fact that you're wearing saffron, does it signify anything that you have? Well, actually, he's wearing blue, I guess. So,
is it monogrammed?
Yogendra Yadav, it's great to have you with us. Swaraj Abhiyan and political analyst. Gardner Harris joining us perhaps for the last time on The Big Fight, not because we don't want you here, but because you're going back to do your House of Cards stints at the White House. So we look forward to getting you from there. And of course, it's always great to have with us Ashok Malik, senior journalist. And we're being joined by Siddharth Birla, immediate past president at FICCI as well. We'll get what industry thinks of all of this. Before we go any further, can I perhaps get a number out of each of you as to how you think he's done, or overall, just one line on how you think the Modi government's done?
I think they've done well, but I can't give a number. I won't give a number.
Okay, Manish?
Well, this government very tantalizingly swings between an E for effort and an F for failure. And if I was to add the word A, it would make it an abject failure. And the reason I say that is because social cohesion is in tatters. Internal security has gone for a tops. The economy is at a nadir, and contrary to what some people believe, foreign policy is not only about collecting non-resident Indians and king-coing in various capitals.
Okay, Yogendra Yadav.
I'm frankly disappointed. I'm disappointed because there is no clear policy direction. There is a very unclear sense of priority, or shall we say somewhat uncomfortable sense of priority. There doesn't seem to be any regard for procedures, and I don't see any team around him. It's just a one-person show.
Ashok, then I'm going to come to Gardner.
I think the primary responsibility and priority of this government was turning around the economy. That is still a work in progress. It hasn't quite happened yet, but the direction has been laid. There has been a bit of fiscal contraction to check inflation, which was a pressing political priority. The government has been helped by low crude prices, no doubt, but there's also been internal stuff they've done to bring down prices. That has given them more political space. They've put down the building blocks towards a long-term economic growth, which hopefully will come in the years to come.
Okay, Gardner?
I mean, if it's a movie review, I give him 2.5 stars. But, we were sort of promised a Salman Khan movie, and we got a Shah Rukh Khan movie instead.
That's not necessarily bad.
Well, I mean,
hang on. Before you get trolled here by millions and millions of Shah Rukh Khan fans, you want to rephrase that?
Well, no, we were promised a lot of action, a lot of sort of bang bang, and we got a lot of talk, and there's a love story there between Modi and Obama, and so there's sort of a lot of kind of interesting things going on. But I think for foreign observers, and particularly for foreign business people, which this government has been wooing, fervently, there's a lot of things that had been hoped would happen and haven't happened. And I think there's an acknowledgement. Look, he's been extraordinary on the world stage, and I think that there has been a great sigh of relief in a lot of foreign capitals all over the place that India may finally take its place among, the big nations instead of being the largest of the small nations. And there seems to have been a quiet burial of this non-aligned policy that has not made sense for a long, long time. So that's wonderful. But that's not, as Ashok said, that's not really why he was elected. He was elected for the economy. That is a work in progress. A year has passed, and worries are beginning to grow.
Let me get Siddharth Birla in on that front.
Given all the pulls and pushes that have happened in the last year, I think they've done a wonderful job of doing what they are supposed to do. Now, having said that, we do see that investment is not yet on the ground. Consumer sentiment hasn't improved, but it's not really the job of the government. This is how business cycles operate. And consumer sentiment, unless it goes up, unless the capacities get full up, the people are not going to put money. Unless Indians put money, the foreigners are really going to wait and watch or watch from the sidelines before they put money. From FICCI's side, we had worked out last year that, it is going to be 18 to 24 months before you see concrete results.
All right, based on what all of you have said, I think let's just look at the 5 issues that perhaps you could argue brought down the UPA government. And let's see how Mr. Modi is fared on each of those parameters. And I'm just putting them up for you, and then I'll get a quick take from any of you who want to. Inflation, prices were really high. Corruption, and a perception that there was one corruption scandal after the other. A stagnant economy, policy paralysis and policy flip-flops, and a leadership vacuum. Those are the 5 things that the UPA perhaps was accused of, which is the reason why Modi won. Now, how's he done on each of those? I'll give you my take, then I'm going to come to all of you. Probably on those fronts reasonably well, because inflation under control, not entirely thanks to him perhaps, it's also crude prices and things like that, but inflation seems to be under control. On corruption, no big ticket corruption item so far. Economy, that's something which we can debate. It's looking up, but perhaps a lot more still needs to be done. Policies seem to be in place, but implementation arguably is still a problem, and we need to look at that. And when it comes, and also, we have to look at Parliament and Rajya Sabha numbers and all of that. So that's perhaps a question mark. Leadership vacuum, and obviously there's very strong leadership, but as Manish says, is there too much centralization in one person? That perhaps could be looked at. So on that front, just your take on those 5 things which brought down the UPA, how you think Modi is done. You're getting to that, I'm going to get everyone on 119.
2 caveats. I think anyone with some political understanding would agree that comparing any Prime Minister of this country to UPA 2's end period would be a very, very unfair comparison. We are dealing with a government which was one of the weakest governments in independent India, and to give Mr. Modi or anyone in the world credit for being a shade better than that is not really complimenting them very much. Also do remember, any serious corruption charges never come up in the first 1 year, because the audit cycle has not trickled in as yet. It always takes about 2.5 to 3 years for major corruption scandals to...
There's high-level corruption taking place as we speak, which is...
All I'm saying is that we should not be so confident. We should look at how coal auctions have taken place, why there is so little transparency in these coal auctions. 2 years down the line, when CAG has done the audit and you and I know what really happened, we may have a different story to tell. Too early to comment on these things.
Okay. Manish?
The question of inflation, I agree with you that inflation was a problem during the UPA years, but the negative inflation that you are seeing now could actually mean a contraction of the economy. And the economy could be...
It's not anywhere close to being negative inflation. There is still inflation. It's just lower than it was.
Minus 2.65. Those are government's own numbers. So therefore...
Are you saying India is heading for deflation?
I think there is a contraction of the economy which is taking place, which is exceedingly worrying. On the question of corruption, yes, I acknowledge the perception of corruption hit us. But even as we speak, on the so-called big-ticket TRP tom-tomming, which all of you did, there has not been a single conviction by any court of law. Well, we'll not get into it. We did more at your saying than anything else. But be that as it may, as we speak, the judiciary has not spoken on any of those issues. Insofar as the economy is concerned, I think 7.74% consistently over a period of 10 years, despite an economic meltdown and the Eurozone crisis, is not a bad number. Okay. And 6.9% at 2011-2012 base year, which we bequeathed to this government, is again not a bad number at all. And policy paralysis, don't even get me started on how this government has emasculated the Appointments Committee of Cabinet, where the Home Minister sees files down rather than on their way up. So the sum total of this government is 3 men in a boat. The Prime Minister, his Finance Minister, and the President of the BJP. And nobody else counts for anything at all. And there is a complete emasculation of the Westminster system.
Is that true? 3 men in a boat?
I'm grateful to Manish. I'm grateful to Manish for having used a strong word like emasculation. Actually, that's exactly where we should start. Political authority of the Prime Minister and the institution of Prime Minister has never been as emasculated as we saw it under the UPA. That you had a government that was subservient to the party. Thankfully, if in the interest of the country, the political office of the Prime Minister is re-established, it's cause for celebration. In the last government, you saw it functioning as a coalition of ministries. They were personal fiefdoms. You could have ministers just looking with disdain to the Prime Minister's office, making policy as they wished and for whomever they wished, rather than in the interest of the country. So you didn't have 2G as for nothing, you didn't have Colgate for nothing, and you had the courts coming in and stepping in and actually showing them both their place and throwing out such policy. So therefore, when Yogendra ji says you can't compare it, yes, that is the worst model of governance that this country has seen, which was the UPA. So certainly, the next government is to make a complete break from it, is supposed to do exactly not what the last government did. Otherwise, we are shooting ourselves in the foot before our term comes. And the last point is, with regard to the government itself, clearly this government is decisive.
On the question of being decisive, this entire issue of too much centralization, one man can't run the country, worked reasonably well in Gujarat, but can it work very well in the rest of the country?
Right. The previous government was disastrous, had zero leadership. Narendra Modi has brought an enormous improvement in empowering the PMO. The question is, has he made
How about
too much of
empowering
it?
the ministers?
Right, that's the worry, and you know, just how broad is this government? Because the worry is that the prime minister remains a chief minister, that he governs like a chief minister, that he wants to simply accelerate the bureaucracy, but he has not been able to sort of bring the legislative power that you want in a central government to reform the government. He's simply making it work a little bit better, but he's not really changing it in any dramatic way.
Ashok?
And from a Western perspective, that's deeply worrisome.
Ashok, trying to do too much, I mean, like what happened in Gujarat can only work on a national stage up to a point.
3 points I'd like to make. One, chief ministers, especially strong chief ministers, tend to be run very centralized ships. As Nalin pointed out, a government tends to overcorrect the mistakes its predecessor made. When Manmohan Singh was Prime Minister, especially in UPA 2 or even UPA 1 actually, Manish spoke about the Appointments Committee of Parliament, but not just secretaries, but even private secretaries to ministers, especially ministers from coalition governments, coalition parties or allied parties, were being appointed by those ministers directly and then post facto being approved by the Prime Minister's office and the Appointments Committee of Cabinet. That is true. So from that complete loose system, a certain degree of authority had to be taken back by the PMO, which is what Mr. Modi did. Has he overcorrected? Maybe he has. Will he loosen up? Is he starting to loosen up with some ministers in whom he has confidence, like the coal minister, for instance? I think that is beginning to happen as well.
Okay.
Changing the way the government functions, changing the way the administration functions. That was also central to Mr. Modi's mandate. I don't think enough has been done on that yet.
All right, Siddharth Birla, let me get you in on that point. On the style of government that you're seeing right now, are you seeing a very radical shift from what was happening earlier? And as we were perhaps talking about here, has there been an overcorrection in the other direction?
No, I wouldn't say there's been an overcorrection. I think they're moving according to their own agenda. But just to answer your point about the centralization and the way decisions are being taken, I mean, let's for a moment compare ourselves to an airplane. I mean, the commander on the left seat has the final word on everything that happens on that flight, and yet there is no way that the commander can make the flight move unless the entire team is working tirelessly to get the flight operating well. So I think let's not underestimate India, that that India requires such few decisions that only one man is taking all the decisions. I think the most important thing is we are not really seeing a backlog of decisions, and as long as that is happening, I think the government is working well. And how does it matter as to who's deciding?
Let's not get fixated only on the question of PMO and its relationship with ministers. As I said, there isn't much of a team, and if there is a team, as Mr. Birla says there is, it's very well concealed at the moment. But I think the larger questions about decision making are the government versus the parliament. The manner in which the parliament has been sidestepped, Parliament has been avoided on the question of bringing ordinances again and again, these surreptitiously designed money bills so that you don't have to go to Rajya Sabha. This is dangerous. About judiciary, about all other autonomous institutions. Autonomy is a word this government hasn't heard. They don't understand what it means.
Then I just wanted to pick up on something which Ashok was saying. Trust and faith in your ministerial colleagues is the essence of any democratic system. Allowing a minister to pick up his personal staff is not extending him a favor, but yes, appointing a mole in his personal staff is definitely undermining him. On the question of Parliament, what my apprehension is, Vikram, that you are heading for an institutional clash in this country. It is not only going to be limited to the executive and Parliament, because there's an inherent natural tension in that relationship, but the manner in which the entire proceeding is even unfolding with regard to the judiciary, and especially the higher judiciary, I would tend to agree with what Yogendra is saying, that autonomy or institutional flexibility is not.
So let's. But you could argue that Parliament does not exist. Parliament has not been functioning. I mean, if you look at the number of decisions, it's all very well. It's all very well, Manish, to say that what has the government been able to get done and why have they not been able to move faster. But the fact of the matter is, and it happened in the UPA's time too. The UPA, a lot of the fact that the UPA couldn't get things done was because Parliament was just simply log-jammed. That's happening now too. And that, therefore, is an overall problem that we have to find some answers to.
There's a difference between the House being log-jammed and no discussion taking place, and between Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha disagreeing, which is a very much part of our constitutional design. That's not a log-jam. This is what the constitution makers designed this country to be.
Bills passed this past year, which is the most in the last 6 years, as far as I know.
But has there been a bypassing of Parliament, as Yogendra is saying?
First of all, an overstatement by either Yogendra ji or Manish ji is not acceptable, because work has been done. Yes, there are differences of opinion on certain bills. So therefore, it's restricted to a few, and there's a lot of noise about it. But don't forget what has been achieved. The second part is trust and faith. They are nice words that Manish has used. But the fact of the matter is, in the last government, that faith was not even reposed in the Prime Minister of India. So therefore, it's nice to be moralistic post facto.
Okay,
the third point I want to come. No, the third is about logjam. The logjam is basically nothing unconstitutional has been done by this government. Even if it's ordinances, they are inordinately much less than ever done by any of the dispensations before this.